Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Dear students, today is our second lecture for the subject of stylistics. In our first lecture, we discussed the notion of style. We tried to understand through examples what does the notion or the concept of style stand for in literature, in literary works. And if the study of style is so much significant, then we must devise or we must study a technique or a method that helps us understand what a style denotes, what a style represents, and how a message or a meaning of a text or a writing can be conveyed effectively through the use of a particular style. So, as notion of style revealed the significance of style for literature and also how it is linked to meaning as well as the form of the text. In order to review what we studied about the concept of stylistics, we will have a look at the major concepts that stylistics explains or which are important for the development as well as the understanding of the field of stylistics. Stylistics, as we discussed earlier as well, is the study of style in literature, and it is also applied to the verbal messages. It is also applicable to the study of speech as well as writing. We do not confine the study of stylistics as a method only for the use and analysis in the understanding of literary works. We also use the methods and techniques utilized by stylisticians only for the study of speech, not just writing. Stylistics applies the concepts developed in the field of linguistics as well as in literature in a hope to arrive at a better, rigorous and fuller understanding of the writings and speech. So the objective of stylistics is to analyze, interpret the messages encoded in a text, and that understanding of the messages encoded in the text is not possible without the study of style, without the study of language of a work. Just to have a look at how stylistics developed, how it emerged as a distinct field, as a modern method of analysis and study of style. We have to trace its development as well as its origin in the classical writings. In the works of Greek writers or the Greek scholars, we find the existence of the fields of poetics, rhetoric, and dialectics. Now, stylistics owes its existence to all these three fields, which were popular in classical Greek times. As a discipline, now in the 21st century, we link stylistics to literary criticism as well as linguistics, whereas its origin is traced through the development of the fields of poetics, rhetoric, and dialectics. Poetics helped the scholars to understand what are the laws and principles that govern the construction of language and style in literary works, either plays or poems. On the other hand, rhetoric is the study of the development of speeches or effective speeches. What are the components, what sort of a language can be used for devising or producing effective speeches. Similarly, dialectics is a field which helps in the creation of discussion and effective dialogues. That is a method that helps in the conversation or in the turn-taking in the dialogues. So, poetics, literary criticism, rhetoric, dialectics, and the 20th century developments in the field of linguistics paved the way for the development of stylistics. Now, stylistics stands as a distinct field which is necessary for the analysis of style of discourses of various types, not just literary writings in the form of poems, stories, or novels, but also it can be applied to the discourses like the discourse in advertisement, the discourses in the political speeches, or the religious sermons. So in this way, we find the relevance and significance of stylistics is quite broader and it is multidisciplinary. It does not confine itself, it does not limit itself just to the study of literature and literary works. The analysis, understanding, and methods devised in stylistics can be applicable to other fields of human life as well. Just to have a look at the developments that took place in the 19th century in the field of the study of style, we see the emergence of two schools. The first school is that of practical criticism, which was initiated by the scholars like I.A. Richards and William Empson. I.A. Richards and William Empson developed an approach for the study of the texts or literary works to focus on the text itself. They devised a method to study what the texts connote, what the texts mean, and how are they composed. So they also focused on how the texts affect the reader. How do they create a particular response in the reader, which means that what are the features of a style of writing that influence the reader, that convince a reader, or that affect a reader. So in this way, we can say that Richards and Empson's practical criticism helped to understand the text in the way that how is it composed and how does it affect the reader. The same approach of practical criticism devised by Empson and Richards was initiated in America in the form of new criticism. The spirit or the principles that governed the practical criticism were followed by new criticism, which was initiated in America by Kenneth Brooks. So Brooks started the similar movement in America for the study of literary styles, which started the practice of the study of style of literary works. So these are the two major schools of the 19th century, one developing in England and the other progressing in America, which led to the development of criticism of style, criticism on style of literary works. Keeping in view the modern developments in literary stylistics, we see the importance of Russian formalism, as the name suggests that it was a movement that started in Russia. It is Russian formalism because it started in Russia, and it is a 20th century development. Certain linguists and scholars devised a way or a method to focus on the significance as well as the style of poetic language. So Russian formalists studied the style of poems, the style employed for the creation of poetry, in order to determine how the language of poetry is different, unusual, and how does it deviate, how does it differ from the language of other fields, from the language of other arts as well. So now we can trace the development of stylistics in a systematic order by looking at the origin that lies in the Greek and classical writings and scholarship, through the study of poetics, dialectics, and also the modern stylistics that owes its existence to the developments in Russian formalism, practical criticism. Russian formalism was a movement of the 20th century that focused on the study of the style of poems or the language of poetry. the purpose of the formalists was to study how the style of the poetry differs from the style of other fields of literary writings. When a writer expresses an idea, he has to fabricate that idea, he has to cover that idea, present that idea through a style. And the style or expression of a writer, the form of a work, is as significant as the matter, the subject matter, or the messages that the writer wants to convey to the reader. So, if a writer is writing an ode, for example, which is a particular type of a poem in which a poet pays tribute to something, or he writes in the praise of something, for example, Keats's Ode to Autumn, where he praises autumn, its beauty, its splendor, also its magnificence. Now, Keats, for example, has chosen a particular genre or a kind of expression through literature, that is poetry. Within poetry, for example, he sticks to a particular form of poetry, that is an ode. Now, within the study of the ode, you will find many literary devices, many particular use of syntax or diction or the figures of speech. Now, these are the further minute details of style. Style is not just the selection of a particular kind or a genre of literature. Style also encompasses the intricacies, the details, and the minute techniques that a writer employs. For example, metaphors, figures of speech, imagery, personification, all these devices, or even use of a particular tense, they all are part of style. They all denote the writer's preference for a particular sort of a language which he has chosen and has expressed his feelings through. Now, I hope it's quite, clear now that what stylistics is. As a method of analysis, it applies a particular way of analysis on literary works, and this analysis of literary works is done in order to make understanding better, to make interpretation better, and also in order to appreciate the writer's works, in order to merit or value the works of the literary artists. Now let us have a look at what stylistics is. As a subject or as a discipline, what does it carry within itself, and what is its scope, what is its importance or significance, how can it be expanded, where can it be applicable. Stylistics, as we have been saying, is a critical method, a critical scientific method that analyzes literary works on the basis of their style. The stylisticians, who are the practitioners, just the way you call people literary critics who apply literary criticism on work. Similarly, you call those who use stylistic analysis as stylisticians. The stylisticians or the practitioners of stylistics focus on analyzing the writer's stylistic choices. Now, what are the stylistic choices? Stylistic choices are those peculiarities of language which a writer uses or sticks to. For example, the use of a particular tense, use of particular syntax order, or the use of literary devices, imagery. Now, these are all the stylistic choices that a writer makes himself. In analyzing literary works, stylisticians also explore the ideas whether writers use ordinary language or colloquial language, language of everyday speech and use, or whether they use quite elevated or more grand language. Their elevated language is what would demand more closer attention, because everyday language would not make use of many devices or such schemes which are quite unfamiliar to the reader. So when a writer makes use of elevated speech or grand language, it demands more careful attention to the text. It demands more careful examination of the text. For the sake of analysis of the particular literary choices that a writer makes, we as the practitioners of stylistics pay attention to the syntax. For example, syntax is referred to as the order of words within a sentence. We also pay attention whether the writer is making use of visual or auditory imagery. How does this visual imagery or auditory imagery really complement the theme of the work or complement the style and the reasons for which the writer is producing a particular work. So stylistics not only identifies the particular elements of language within a text or an utterance, but it also looks at what functions these particular choices or stylistic choices perform in a literary text. According to Jeffrey Leach, stylistics is a linguistic approach to literature, explaining the relationship between language and artistic function with motivating questions such as why and how more than what. So in his book Style in Fiction, there is a linguistic guide to English poetry. Jeffrey Leach has devised a definition of the nature of stylistics, that what type of analysis stylistics carries out on literary texts. And in his explanation of the nature of stylistics, he emphasizes that stylistics approaches text from a linguist's orientation, because a linguist is sensitive to language. A linguist is not concerned with what the writer's intentions are, what were the issues prevalent in the society that helped create this piece of writing. Rather, a linguist is concerned with what the text carries, how is it composed, and what are the elements that it has been created with. So that is why Leach says that stylistics is a linguistic approach to literature, that we apply the theories of linguistics or the methods of analysis devised in linguistic studies on the study of literary text. So in this way, you can better understand that how stylistics as a discipline or a subject is bridging the gap or the gulf that existed between linguistics and literary criticism, or linguistics and literary writings. Now that we apply through stylistics a text-centered approach as well as a sensitivity towards language that is developed for the analysis of the style of writing, our purpose is to explain the relationship between language and artistic function. Now, this part of Leach's quotation demands further explanation, that what is a relationship between language and the artistic function. Now, the relationship between language and artistic function will be clear to you when you understand why do we use language. Mostly, the primary purpose of language is to communicate, to express, in order to attain something, achieve something. So we say that language primarily serves communicative purposes or utilitarian purposes. That is done for the sake of conveying ideas and gaining information. For example, a speaker says something or a writer says something to inform the reader or the listener. And the reader or listener receives something because he wants to be informed, he wants to know. Apart from this function, the primary function of language, that it communicates, that it satisfies the sense of being informed or being a person of knowledge in the society, we see that on the other hand, language, especially the literary language, performs another function that is referred to as the aesthetic function. Now, aesthetic function is not dominated by utilitarianism or the need to communicate. The artistic function of language presents itself in the urge of expression on part of a writer. A writer who is motivated through aesthetic impulses would express his ideas, emotions, feelings in a literary way through a poem or piece of fiction. On the other hand, the reader will be motivated to read or to interact with the writer's aesthetic expression to satisfy his need of gaining pleasure from the reading. Now, this function of literature, that is the aesthetic function, is something that extends the notion of style. Because when language is being used for the purpose of communication only, we are not really concerned about beautifying our language or embellishing our language. We just want to have a sense of clarity in our conveying information to the reader or the audience. Whereas when we are motivated by the sense of aesthetic appeal, we concentrate on embellishing the style of language and the style of writings with such words which appeal to the readers, which aesthetically appeal to the readers more. And for example, you would find this aesthetic function to be fulfilled in the writings when the writers make use of literary devices, making use of a metaphor or personification or images, either visual, auditory. The writers give satisfaction to this sense or feeling that their expression, that is literary expression, should be different and superior to the utilitarian or communicative expression. So, Jeffrey Leach's description that stylistics studies the relationship between language and artistic expression emphasizes the fact why the study of style is significant, because it emphasizes the need for a discipline or a field which would exclusively study the style of language or the style of literary works. The second part of Leach's definition emphasizes another very important principle, that is the question of why and how rather than what. For example, as in the first lecture also, I emphasized the fact that stylistics as the study of style of literary writings would focus more on how a writer writes rather than on what a writer writes. Because what is the message or the theme of a work and how is the style of a work? Don't you feel the same that when you are tackling or handling a text, either a poem or a story, you jump to the conclusion about what the story is about, what is the theme of the work, what is the idea that the writer wants to convey, rather than how it has been composed, how it has been created. And usually as a student or as a learner, we jump to the description of the ideas conveyed in a poem rather than the style employed by the poet to compose the poem. So when earlier we have been ignoring the importance of style in literary writings, the 20th century approach as well as the 21st century approach to literature would denote that the value of style will be enhanced. The significance of style will be in focus for such criticism and analysis. Now, when Jeffrey Leach states that how a writer writes and what a writer writes, and from among these two notions, our focus will be on how a writer writes, that is, how a work is composed, what are the parts that make up a piece of writing. For example, what are the essential components that a writer makes use of, which particular tense is employed, which particular category of verbs have been employed by the writer, or the other peculiarities of writing such as a particular tense, or a particular syntax order, or also use of deviation or breaking the rules of writing. Now, these notions of style would help us in analyzing how a writer writes, and also why. The question why is also answered in the study of stylistics, because we, after looking at what a piece of writing is composed of, would also be able to analyze why the writer has been sticking to particular choices, why some other choices of style, language and devices were not suitable. So, Jeffrey Leach explains the importance of the composition or the makeup of writing. Looking at the nature of stylistics in more detail and depth, we see stylistics as a distinctive term, a term which is used to distinguish and determine the connections between the form and the effect. Now, what is the form? Form is the style. Form is the exterior of a work. Form is the expression that the writer has chosen for his ideas, for communicating his ideas. And effect is how the text influences us, or what meanings does the text carry with it. So, within a particular variety of language, for example, a variety of language could be a speech or an essay, anything that is in the form of writing or speech can be a particular variety of language, because it is something that belongs to a particular category. And within it there is a particular form, because the form of a poem would be different from the form of a legal document, an application, or a sermon or a speech. So, within a particular form, there are categories, there are features which are employed by the writers for the expression and also for the meaningful utterances. Therefore, stylistics looks at what is going on in a text, which means what is happening in a text. Text is something that is not a static thing. It is a process. It is a product which is composed of various elements, which is a combination of various elements. When a text or a literary piece is not something static, is not something that has been composed of a single element, it demands very much scientific investigation. And we look at what the linguistic associations are that the style of language reveals. These linguistic associations are to be found between the form and its effect. We look at what are the connections between the style as well as its message or theme. What are the relationships between the form of a work and the effects that it produces on the readers. For example, to clarify the idea of the connection between form and effect, observe when you read an elegy or an elegiac poem. An elegy is a kind of a poem that is expressing the grief at the loss of somebody dear. Now, if a poet composes an elegy, that is a song or utterance of a sad kind, in which there is melancholy, there is gloom, there is also regret and the fear or the sorrow of parting. Now, an elegy would affect the reader in a particular way. It would make the reader sympathize or empathize with the speaker, with the poet. Now, this is the effect of the form. This is the effect of the form on the reader. That due to the particular choice of a form, for example, an elegiac poem, the writer has chosen particular words which convey the feeling of loss, mourning, regret, and sorrow. That is why its particular form, the elegiac form, has the same effect on the reader, that the reader would be sad, or he would feel sympathy for the loss that the poet had been through or the speaker had been through. Some other important features of stylistics include the use of dialogue, use of regional accents, dialects, and also descriptive or the language that is narrative language. Now all these are types or forms of expression in literature. For example, dialogues are found in the plays. In the study of drama, we see how dialogues are created. How does the art of rhetoric govern the utterances and compositions of dialogues by a dramatist? Similarly, if you apply the notions of stylistics on speech and everyday use of language, you also notice the use of regional dialects, accents, and the speeches, how the variety of dialects and accents also add to the notion of style. Similarly, in writing, we see how narrative writing and descriptive writing are governed by certain different principles. Narrative writing follows the style of narration or the delineation of events, and descriptive writing would follow the principles of defining clearly the objects, persons, and things, or even events. So, all the laws of grammar, language, composition, and literary function of text, they are used in the production of these styles, in the production of these works. Apart from dialogue, regional accents, or the study of descriptive and the narrative language in speech or writing, stylistics also looks at the use of grammar, the function of grammar in writing. For example, if in a writing, the writer on and off moves to the expression that may change towards passive voice or the use of direct speech, we look at its composition, its function, its significance, and how does it shift or how does it deviate from the expression of writing or the expression of literary writing. So the use of particular features of grammar, syntax, or even vocabulary or tense form, also the use of voice, a particular voice such as active voice or passive voice, is also a feature of literary writing which a stylistician will focus on. Similarly, the distribution of sentence length, the syntax order. For example, you observe that poetry is something that expresses the thoughts of a writer in a more brief, concise, and crisp a manner, rather than sticking to the description of details in a very lengthy way. So the distribution of sentence in poetry would be different than it would be in prose. The distribution of sentence length would be different in a dialogue than it would be in the description by the author about the setting or situation, or his comment upon the character or the function of the work. Similarly, we also study the particular use of registers, the particular language registers. Now, registers are particular types of languages which are made up of maybe technical language or a language that belongs to a particular field. For example, you can distinguish or identify a register of language with reference to the example of the course of stylistics too. The notions and concepts that we are studying in stylistics, they are the particular academic register in the field of linguistics or literature. So that is the field that we bound ourselves to, because we are making use of a particular technical vocabulary in it. Similarly, the register can be poetic register, or the register which is used in the official discussions. Now, all these registers or languages, or the particular set of languages which are employed by the people working in a particular field, they demand attention to what is there which distinguishes one form of register from another. What are the basic principles that govern the creation of a particular register and its significance and use in a particular field? As we have now understood that stylistics is the scientific study of style, the emphasis on the word scientific implies that the analysis is not random, the analysis is not biased, the analysis is not personal. What cannot be justified, what cannot be located within a text, within a literary writing, for example, it cannot be explained due to the wishes of a speaker or the reader or the analyst. When we distinguished the approach of stylistics from that of literary criticism, we focused on this point that stylistics does not take into account the author's intentions or reasons for writing a particular text. We disregard writers' history, psychology, biography, or even political, philosophical leanings when we analyze a text from a stylistician's orientation. So, this is what makes the study of stylistics or the field of stylistics a scientific and objective method, because here what we cannot justify within the language through our understanding of linguistic concepts, we cannot use it for our explanation of the text just because we feel so. So, in order to remove the bias of the critic or the analyst, stylistics develops a scientific and objective method where it would take help from linguistics as well as from literary criticism to analyze the text vigorously and scientifically. Now, we say that stylistics is a scientific method because it follows an objective methodology. That methodology is explained by Short in his work and his composition. He says that stylistics is an objective methodology. It retraces or recovers the process of text production. Now, this definition by Short means that as an analyst, a stylistician wants to decipher or decode the composition of a text, the formation of a text. He wants to recover and retrace what are the processes involved in the making, in the creation, construction or production of a writing. For example, he may also take into account the intention of the writer, that the writer has composed a particular piece because he relies on the notion of conveying a particular feeling through either an elegy or a sonnet or an ode. The definition continues, in which Leach says that we start from the clues left in text as a product or a piece that is the expression of an author. Because why is it a product? Because it will be consumed and utilized by the reader. The writer does not give a manual of instructions along with the work. When he writes with a particular intention or with a particular feeling to convey an idea or a message, he does so through particular use of language, particular set of vocabulary, or for example, or diction. Now, the work or the literary piece becomes a product because it will be utilized, understood, and received by the reader. And now the writer is not sitting along the reader when he receives the text, who would explain what the text is about. So it means that it is the language of the text which would convey all the meanings that are inherent in the text. So the reader will not study the personality of the author or meet the author in person or study the manual that the writer might have created for the analysis of the text. What the reader encounters would only be the final product that is made up of a particular style, that is made up of a particular language. So that is why a work or a piece of writing becomes a product. because it will be consumed by the reader. The reader is the receiver or the consumer of the product. So it sets it apart from other less scientific methods of text analysis. Now, Short's description emphasizes the fact that stylistics is a different approach from literary criticism. It is a distinct approach because it will not take into account only the writer's intentions, which might be clear to the reader through his reading or understanding of the writer's biography. For example, when we are to tackle Thomas Hardy's text, usually before reading his novel, for example, that is The Mayor of Casterbridge or Tess of D'Urbervilles, before we approach these texts, the novels, we as a reader would feel shaky that we may not be able to understand the text fully until or unless we read a little first about the author himself. What type of a man Hardy was, what sort of a life he has led, what sort of experiences he had been through, what were his political, religious views, or what was the economic conditions in the society in which he lived. Now, after reading Hardy's biography or getting information about his life, we will approach the text with the eye of a reader who is informed about the author's work. Now, this approach is something that is not scientific because it is starting from the perspective of the author's life and experiences. It is not text-centered approach which stylistics promotes or focuses on. So over here, Short has given this description in order to bring into focus the importance of a new way or mode of analysis of a text. That would be scientific. It would not take help from the clues that the writer's life or biography offers to the reader. Rather, it is this approach, stylistics, is set apart from other less scientific methods. Now, this is a less scientific method whose example I gave to you a moment ago, that in order to read Hardy or analyze Hardy's novel, his style and his work, I start my reading with the understanding of Hardy's life. Now, to Short, this approach would be less scientific because stylistics wants to focus on the style of work regardless of the personality of the author, regardless of the experiences of the author. So, Short's description of the nature of stylistics describes to us that now the style of analysis which earlier dominated in the literary scholarship or literary criticism, which approached texts from the perspective of the author, is to be given less importance, if could not be abandoned completely, so that a more scientific, objective and rigorous method of analysis could be devised. Now, let us have a look at the scope, at the breadth of stylistics. That what is it that stylistics can encompass within itself as a field of analysis, as a method of analysis, as a subject for the analysis of literary styles or even styles in any other discourse in society. Now, the scope would also shed light on the significance of the subject of stylistics, because when we realize in how many fields the study of stylistics will be of help, it will definitely shed light on how significant and important the subject of stylistics is. According to David Lodge, it is impossible to paraphrase literary writings, to translate literary works, or to divorce or separate the general appreciation of a literary work from the appreciation of its style. David Lodge, in his book Language of Fiction, has given this definition that emphasizes on the significance of style, that if you want to understand the meanings of a particular work, if you want to develop an understanding of literary writings and translate or interpret what the writer wishes to convey, you cannot have the appreciation of the work or the understanding of the work without paying attention to its style. Now, appreciation of style and understanding of the merit of the style of literature or literary expressions is as important as is the understanding of the text. This definition by David Lodge reminds us the significance of style in language that earlier Leach and other critics and linguists have also pointed towards. They pointed to the fact that earlier our understanding of literature was focused only on the meanings of texts. What do the writers convey? What are the messages? What are the ideas? What are the themes of their writings? Now, with the developments in the methods of analysis of literary writings, especially the development in the field of linguistics, the scholars and critics are becoming aware of the significance of style as well as the significance of stylistics as an appropriate method of analysis of literary works. When we try to analyze a style, we also discover the hidden messages or meanings. For example, a text may carry a metaphor, and a metaphor extends the meaning of a work. A text may carry a pun. A pun shows the double meanings of a work. So in this way, we do not compromise on the understanding of the meaning of a work. Rather, we get the multiple meanings out of a text, which might have been ignored had we not paid attention to style. If our approach to the understanding of a text had been superficial, had been focusing only on what does the text reveal to the reader, what does the text mean, we would have missed the beauty of certain devices like puns or metaphors or the double entendres that the works carry within. So the metaphorical, symbolic meanings of the text would be possible for the readers to reach at only through the vigorous and deeper analysis of style. So again, stylistics shows its significance because it would enable us to find multiple meanings in a text, to find the abundance or wealth of knowledge in a text, which in a superficial glance of a writing would have been missed. And now that a stylistician focuses on the style more minutely, the style would reveal to him as many meanings as possible, which would not have been possible had we been focusing only on what the text means, what the text conveys to the reader, what is the theme of the work. The scope, the breadth, and the vastness of the subject and field of stylistics could be analyzed as we see that stylistics is the study of style that is used in literary writings as well as in verbal expression or language. And what are the responses or effects that the reader or a writer wishes to communicate to the reader or listener? Because the impulse of creation, the impulse of writing a literary piece is not dominated just by the urge or feeling to communicate, give expression to something that was lying deeper in the writer's mind. But in order to see the responses of the reader, how the readers respond to a text and how the readers are affected by the text is also part of the pleasure, the aesthetic pleasure that a writer gains. And gaining the aesthetic pleasure after the response of the reader would only be possible through the use of minute details in writing, which we do not focus on in ordinary and everyday speech. Rarely or hardly would we make use of grand, elevated, or quite distinct form of language in our daily expression, because there we want to communicate as clearly to the audience as possible. Whereas in the language of literature, the writers want to hide the meaning in the multiple layers so that the reader peels off all these layers and derives pleasure in reaching to the meaning, or he has to go through an effort to reach to the essence of the work, the idea or message of a work. Stylistics also attempts to establish principles capable of explaining the particular choices made by individuals and social groups in their use of language, such as socialization, production and reception of language and its meaning. And it also involves using literary criticism and critical discourse analysis. Now, this is the breadth of stylistics. This is the scope of stylistics, that it carries or encapsulates within itself these many fields. That not only do we study through stylistics how individuals make use of language, but also we study the language of a particular society or group of people. For example, in the beginning of the course, we located the idea that not only do we distinguish a particular writer's style on particular choices, but also we say that Elizabethan writers or poets write in a particular way. The Romantic poet's style is almost the same. Now, people living in a particular community or in a particular time, era, would be using the same set of rules that govern the use of language. So, stylistics also studies that. Here you can see it takes help from sociolinguistics, that what are the laws that govern the change of dialect in a particular society, or the change of accent or language, vocabulary, its style that is used by a particular community, group or people. We study through stylistics the production and reception of meaning, how meanings are created through the use of language, how the meanings are received, how the meanings affect the reader or the speaker, how a particular use of a word or language communicates what the intention of the speaker had been. For this, stylistics also takes help from literary criticism and critical discourse analysis. Now look at the breadth of stylistics, that it does not disregard the developments or techniques of the analysis of style produced in literary criticism, which developed in the 19th century and was in vogue in the 20th century, and which developed into many other branches and forms in the contemporary century or the 21st century. For example, literary criticism has expanded into various literary or critical theories like feminist theory or the Marxist theory. Now these are the angles through which we approach text. So stylistics takes into account literary criticism, linguistic theories, and apart from that, another field, that is critical discourse analysis. Now discourse, as I've also explained earlier, is expression, either written or oral. Now if stylistics also studies written and oral discourses, either the discourse of advertisement, the discourse of literature, the discourse of the conversation maybe. So what are the laws that govern the analysis and criticism of the style that particular discourses employ is also something that becomes the part of stylistic studies. So imagine how broad, how vigorous a stylistic analysis would be, because it takes into account not only the concepts of linguistics, grammar, rules of syntax, use of literary devices and figurative speech, but also employs the laws and principles of linguistics as well as literary criticism, and then expands itself to different other literary theories and critical discourse analysis. Why? These fields and how these fields contribute to the making of a speech or the making of a writing or a particular discourse. So this is the breadth, this is the scope, this is the vastness of the subject of stylistics, that you cannot just limit its focus to the study of the literary styles only. And even for the study of literary styles, stylistics can draw help from discourse analysis, literary criticism, and other literary theories or perspectives for the analysis of a literary text. The subject of stylistics will enable us to name or to identify the particular constituent parts of a literary text. For example, the verbs, the phonemes, the morphemes, or the semantic makeup of a work, the morphological makeup of a work. These are all the particular constituents of a literary text, which will be studied in the due course of the lectures that or the study of the subject of stylistics. Today it is just the broader understanding of the scope of stylistics that we are getting. So we will be coming into contact with such devices or elements which stylistics focuses on in the later lectures. It enables, or stylistics enables us to document their operations, the operations of the particular parts of a literary text. It also does so in the use of the terminology or the methodology of multiple disciplines. For example, the study of meter, the study of narrative, or the study of dialogue. Now, if a stylistic analysis is focusing on, for example, the genre of poetry, the stylistician would look at the phonological patterns, the rhymes, and the meters. The way a composition becomes a poetic composition, not something like prose or free verse. So, the study of meter would be the focus of a stylistician, or the study of the phonological patternings, or the rhyme, external, internal, end rhyme, all the forms of rhyme and meter would be the focus of a stylistician when he will be analyzing a poem. Similarly, if a stylistician is analyzing a literary piece that is a narrative, like a novel, he would focus on the narrative perspective. For example, who is the narrator of the story or novel? Is it a character from whose perspective the story is told? Or is it the author himself who is telling us the story? Or the omniscient narrator who is present in the story yet not a part or character of the story? So, look how the stylistician's focus shifts as the genre or the kind of literary work changes. In the analysis of poetry, the focus was, for example, on meter, rhythm, rhyme, that is the composition or the phonological composition of a piece of poetry. Similarly, when the stylistician's focus shifted to the study of a novel, his focus was on locating the narrator or the narrative voice. Who is the person who is telling the story? Is it a character? Like in a story, a character might be telling us a tale directly, or is it the author telling us through a third person narrative? Similarly, in a drama or a play, the focus is on dialogues, the study and construction of dialogues. So, stylistics presents particular methods and techniques which an analyst or a stylistician can employ and change or adapt according to the text that he is tackling, according to the piece of writing that is under observation. It is the study of fundamental units and principles of all linguistic usage. So, stylistics studies the fundamental or basic units of language. For example, the grammatical construction is based on the placement or the order of subject, verb, object. Then the use of nouns, adjectives, proverbs, adverbs. How these components or fundamental units of language are essential for conveying a particular meaning or for affecting the reader in a particular way. The inclusion or the presence of phonemes, grammatical classes, forms of syntactical organization, rhythmic sequences in a text, they all make up the style of a work. Phonemes, grammatical constructions or classes, forms of syntactical order, pattern or form, or the order of the words and phrases in a sentence, and also the rhythmic sequences. Rhythmic sequences would be the rhyme. Either it is assonance, consonance, or alliteration, or the end rhyme or the internal rhyme that creates the rhythmic sequence or adds to the rhythm in poetry or text. So all these aspects are to be located, are to be identified, and then as a stylistician, we would comment on their relationship, their function in a text. Explaining the scope and the breadth of stylistics, M.K. Halliday, a very famous linguist, in his book Descriptive Linguistics and the Study of Style and Psychology, states that linguistics is not and will never be the whole of literary analysis. He is emphasizing over the fact that if you employ only a linguist's approach, you will not reach to the fuller, deeper, scientific or in-depth understanding of a text. He wishes to convey the idea that linguistic analysis and literary analysis both would make up stylistics. He says that linguistics is not and will never be the whole of literary analysis, and only the literary analyst, not the linguist, can determine the place of linguistics in literary studies. But if a text is to be explained and described at all, it should be described properly by the theories and methods developed in the field of linguistics. Linguistics, whose task is precisely to show how language works. So in this definition that lays emphasis on the fact that linguistics alone cannot help us in reaching to the understanding of a text. Literary analyst and a linguist both need to contribute to the understanding of style, because style is used to convey a particular meaning with which a literary critic is concerned, and the particular meanings are carried or embedded within a particular style or form until or unless a linguist gives explanation of the verbs, language, diction employed by the writer. We as a literary critic cannot understand the connections between form and style, between the content and its appearance or the form that has been employed by the writer. So M.K. Halliday's description lays emphasis on the scope of stylistics, that stylistics as a field of analysis of literary works is not anything without the analysis of a literary critic, nor could it be vigorous or deeper analysis without the help of a linguist. So linguistic analysis and literary analysis, or a literary critic's analysis, both are to be combined to make up what is called stylistic analysis. Stylistics draws principles of inquiry of a text, or principles that are necessary for the understanding of a text from various sources and disciplines. And these sources in various disciplines include linguistics and literary criticism, as now you know very well that stylistics owes its origin to literary criticism. And then the development of stylistics into a separate field and into an investigative scientific method is due to the inclusion of linguistic aspects into it. So it started from literary criticism and it merged into it the notions of linguistics to make itself a scientific method of analysis. Apart from linguistics and literary criticism, which make up what stylistics is: structuralism, semiotics, sociolinguistics, and discourse analysis and gender studies. These are the fields about which we will be getting enlightened in the due course of our studies. That structuralism as a field or as a development, just the way literary criticism had been, contributing to stylistics. Similarly, semiotics, or the study of the meaning of words or language, also contributes to stylistics. Sociolinguistics, or the study of the language use in a particular group, community, or people, is also what helped stylistics in understanding the notion of style, of expression, in literary writings or even in general communication. Discourse analysis, or critical discourse analysis, in which we analyze either speeches or discussions or rhetoric, and also gender studies, how language can help us to understand what the ideas about the notion of gender or a person's person's description about another gender would include. So in this way, we see that stylistics encompasses within it the various sources of inquiry employed in all these various separate disciplines like gender studies, sociolinguistics, discourse analysis, structuralism, and semiotics, apart from literary criticism and linguistics. So the understanding of these concepts from structuralism to gender studies would be a part of our study in the lectures that would follow. So you will be acquainted with how stylistics takes the principles or help from these fields, either structuralism, semiotics, sociolinguistics, discourse analysis, or gender studies. So we would not touch upon the in-depth analysis or understanding of those fields today. We keep it for the next sessions, in which we will analyze how stylistics can take help from the understanding of the fields which are broader and more rigorous, as well as more critical of the understanding of speech as well as writing. Now, the purpose of all this understanding of the scope of stylistics, significance of stylistics, and the nature of, or rather the understanding of the nature of stylistics had been useful in understanding what would stylistics achieve, what would we, through our study or understanding of the subject of stylistics, be able to attain. The general aim from the subject that can be distilled from the subject or the field of stylistics is that it will help us determine which stylistic features, that is, which grammatical categories, for example, are predominant or stylistically significant in a text. That part relates it to the description of a work, to the description of style. No, we look at a text in terms of what does it reveal in terms of meanings. But when, as a stylistician, we will be concerned not only with just what does the text reveal in terms of meaning, but also how is a text composed, how is a text made up to convey a meaning. This will help us to focus our attention on stylistic features. Now, we know what stylistic features are, like particular tense, particular devices, figurative devices, metaphors, similes, or even the use of phonological patternings. These all are part of stylistic features. The features that govern the style of a work or that make up the style of a writing. For example, it may include one of the features, that is grammar of a work, that is grammar of an utterance. Which grammatical category predominates? For example, if a poem is composed using mostly the ing form or the present continuous tense, a stylistician would find it a peculiarity of style, a feature of style, that the writer sticks to a particular tense writer sticks to a particular form of verb, that is the present continuous. So in this way, if we identify a poem making use of most of the gerund forms, we denote or we highlight it as a peculiarity or the feature of style. That is description. We are giving description, we are locating or identifying a particular or a specific feature of style. Also, another aim of stylistics is, apart from the descriptive aim, this aim, the second aim, is the aim of interpretation. It is related to interpreting a text or analyzing the meaning of a text. In this, we decide which function the stylistic features play in the overall meanings of the text. For example, just the way we observed for the first aim, that we locate a particular stylistic feature, a particular feature of style in a poem, that a writer is using the ing form or the present continuous verb in a poem consistently and repeatedly. It has been identified, it has been described as a peculiarity. Now, in order to interpret it, we may come to various conclusions. For example, one description or one interpretation of a writer's sticking to the present continuous tense could be that he wants to convey a sense of continuity, a sense that the activity that he is recapitulating in a text seems to him as if it is still going on, because in memory it is still present, and he wants to convey the same sense of continuity and freshness to the reader. That is why, instead of conveying it in a past tense, he is conveying it in present continuous tense, so that the sense of something happening right now could be felt by the writer just the way the poet felt it when he had been experiencing that feeling, when he had been going through that experience. So here we have located, for example, the particular peculiarity of style or a stylistic feature, that is the use of present continuous tense in a text or a poem, and then our aim was to find out or justify what purpose does a writer achieve through the use of the ing form or the present continuous form. So, at the level of description and at the level of interpretation, we have been able to reason out, to justify the use of the peculiarity of a style of a work. When we say that stylistics focuses on how a writer writes rather than on what a writer writes, it does not mean that stylistics is not concerned with theme, message or idea at all, but it denotes that stylistics is more concerned with how a writer writes less than what a writer writes, because it would be the language that would lead us to the message. It would be the cover, the text that would lead us to the core or the theme. So the message or meaning becomes secondary and the style or the cover becomes primary. When we say how a writer writes, we refer to the devices used, the devices employed by the author in a work. And they employ these devices to express their thoughts more clearly, more precisely, and to convey the subject matter of their work. On the other hand, when we say what a writer writes, we focus on the content, we focus on the themes. The content is the subject matter. What information does the author want to convey to the reader, which may also be referred to as the message of the work. So, how is the style and form of a work? On the other hand, what is the information or the content of a work? How a writer writes is his use of particular language, devices and stylistic choices. What a writer writes is the theme, content, subject matter, ideas, information that he conveys. Now, formal stylistics, as the name itself suggests, has emerged or has come into being due to the formalism, because formalism or Russian formalism, as we discussed in the development of the stylistics as a discipline, that formal stylistics is focusing on form, on the style. That is why from Russian formalism, the word formalism has been associated with stylistics, because it would focus on the form of a work. Formal stylistics understands style as the way authors present the content of a work, the meanings, and the ways that invariably affect the aesthetic quality and the reader's emotional responses. Now, the focus of stylistics or formal stylistics is to analyze the methods and ways which affect the aesthetic quality of a text and which also control or determine the reader's emotional responses or reactions to a text. What is the aesthetic quality of a text? The aesthetic quality is determined through the quality of language, through the distinct use of language. Ordinary language would not be appropriate for literary expression. Literary language is distinguished from ordinary expression. So, the aesthetic quality of a work is determined due to the grandeur, the beauty, the stylistic choices of the author and the work. On the other hand, the reader's emotional responses are the ways in which a reader is influenced, because every work, every writing would affect a reader in a particular way. Now, as a reader, how we react emotionally to a text. Does it make us cry? Does it make us sad? Does it elevate our mood? Does it make us furious? Or does it make us take a particular stance or raise voice or develop a particular feeling about a notion or about an idea? These are all the emotional responses of readers that they develop after reading a text. And there is a deeper connection between the reader's emotional responses and the aesthetic quality of a text, because a writer would depend upon the choices of words and the formation of a text in a particular way that would convey a particular feeling that the reader associates with. So in this way, we say that it all depends upon the style. It all depends on how you say something if you want to impress somebody. Don't you feel the same in your everyday speech as well? If you want to ask for permission, if you want a favor, you devise a strategy. You try to choose particular words or appropriate words so that you do not offend a person and you are able to gain a favor. Similarly, if a writer is also thinking about influencing the reader, making him feel or believe in the same way, the way he does, he would use a particular language. He would use a particular style, which we are supposed to analyze as a stylistician or as the analyst of literary works. So, we can have a look at the discussion that we had today. For example, we started with the understanding of the concept of stylistics and its relevance to literary criticism and linguistics, how it is linked to both the disciplines, criticism and linguistics. We looked at the significance, scope, and nature of the subject too, that what is it that stylistics can be applicable to. For example, it can be applicable to literary contexts as well as contexts in the life as well. For example, speeches, sermons, or the debates, or even the social discourses, the discourse of a community. In this way, we see that Stylistics focuses on how messages are conveyed, how meanings are derived. Why does a writer feel the need to use a particular expression? Because he wants to motivate a reader, because he wants to influence a reader. If the purpose of literary language is different than the ordinary everyday language, for example, the purpose of literary language is not just to communicate or inform the reader, but the literary language also serves to satisfy the aesthetics of a writer as well as the reader. So reader is to be elevated, the reader is to be influenced and affected by a particular poem because it also makes the reader feel the same way. Then if poetry affects a reader, then what are the reasons that he is affected? Because a writer uses particular diction, style, words which are appropriate for soothing or comforting the reader through a particular poem, that is a lyric, for example. Now, this is all that would be a part of the study of stylistics. So, as we studied today, that stylistics would help us in broadening our analysis of literary works. We will look in the future discussions how stylistics as a discipline, as a subject, would help us in the understanding, and what would be the particular elements of style which one by one we will analyze and come to see how linguistics and literature both are helpful in performing analysis. The purpose of the principles of stylistics, scope of stylistics, and objective of stylistics is to enable us to perform an analysis, which would be the ultimate goal of this subject, that it will enable you to be very vigilant and very much objective in the analysis of a text. So as I said earlier as well, that it is a practical subject which is training you, which is guiding you about the principles that govern the analysis of a text. In order to be a good analyst of a literary text, first we will have to look at what a text comprises of, what literary writings are made up of. So, till the time we understand what literary writings are composed of, we will not be able to understand how to analyze a text. So, thank you so much for your attention. It is the second lecture that comes to the end. We will meet with the next topic in the next lecture. Allah Hafiz.